BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia. BlackBoxNed88 on Instagram for the bonus podcast. And just a quick reminder, every Monday is Zodiac Mondays. Wednesday is an Ask Me Anything. That's an AMA, so please drop your questions below for things that you would like discussed here on the show. And Friday is an Anything Goes. Any subject is fair game, mostly talking about true crime, serial killers, the Zodiac Killer, but any subject is welcome. All right, so please share some ideas in the comment section about what you would like to hear about on this channel, and let's get started. Hello and welcome to Black Box Online Radio. What you're about to hear is the first cut of the first half of an episode that was put out just earlier on the murder of Joan Webster and possible Zodiac Killer connections. Upon completion of this podcast segment, I felt that I wasn't satisfied with the content, and I wanted to re-record it, and that was used in a full episode called Did the Zodiac Killer Murder Joan Webster? But if you'd like to listen to the first cut, I decided to upload it anyway. And I also wanted to make the announcement to anyone who is listening to these things as they come out. We will be doing the regularly scheduled Zodiac Monday segment. It will just be coming out a little bit later because I decided to re-record the bonus episode for the weekend. So, without further ado, I would like to invite you to listen to the first cut of Did the Zodiac Killer Murder Joan Webster? Alright, hello everybody. Thank you for tuning in to this special bonus episode of Black Box Online Radio. On the weekends, I've been doing a segment on the serial killer Leonard Paradiso and really trying to answer the question, did he commit all of the murders that have been attributed to him? I've also been corresponding at length with Eve Carson, who is the author of the book Mommy's a Mole, Whale of a Tale, which explores this subject as well. And the two murders that we've been zoning in on are the murders of Maria Anuzzi and Joan Webster. Maria Anuzzi was murdered on August 12th of 1979, and Joan Webster was murdered on or about the 28th of November, 1981. Now, with the case of both of these women, the authorities zoned in on a single man, Leonard Paradiso, and he was convicted for the murder of Maria Anuzzi after a very extensive trial. However, he was not convicted for the murder of Joan Webster yet. That crime has been attributed to him. There's somebody out there, though, who absolutely disagreed with the authorities and their narrative, and he is none other than Gareth Penn, author of the book Times 17, which I am holding now. I have a 6-part book discussion on Times 17 here on this channel, which is what I like to call the Massachusetts connection, because Gareth Penn would not only write a book talking all about the mathematical signatures of the Zodiac Killer, he has perhaps been the loudest voice in trying to link the Zodiac Killer from California in 68 and 69, and really Gareth Penn says all the way back to 66 with the murder of Sherry Jo Bates, trying to connect that set of crimes to the murder of Joan Webster, which occurred in 1981. I would like to go to page 193 of Times 17, and we can have a little bit of a discussion. First, I'll read something and then respond to it. And even though I have done a previous book discussion on Times 17, I'm actually holding the copy that was sent to me by Ray Grant, so big thank you to him. Leonard Paradiso grew up in a blue-collar neighborhood. He dropped out of school in the 8th grade so he could pursue a career peddling clams door-to-door out of a bucket. He had acquired the name Lenny the Clam, and the other name that he was known by was the Quahog. But to move on to the murder of Joan Webster, Joan had been traveling back from Thanksgiving break. It was the 28th of November, and she was at Logan Airport in Boston, Massachusetts. She was waiting in the taxi line to get a taxi to take her to her destination when somebody, a bearded man who was rather roughly dressed, a rather disheveled appearance, approached her and then asked her to change taxis. He was seen by numerous witnesses who were able to provide the composite sketch of this person, and he is said to have been the last person to have seen Joan Webster alive. Joan Webster was a missing person for many years, and it wasn't until 1990 that her remains were discovered buried in the ground. Her body had been placed in a trash bag, her clothes had been removed, but the jewelry remained. So, with the murder of Joan Webster, Gareth Penn would go on to say that the Zodiac Killer was a crime spree that was filled with mathematical signatures. Some of them here, such as 1258 was more of a challenge. Highway 107, on which Joan Webster's purse was found, originates in Revere, Massachusetts, at a roundabout called Brown Circle. It runs just off the northeast, just dead straight through the marshes, with only a slight bend at one point up to Lynn, Massachusetts. If you center a clock face on Brown Circle and read due north at 12 o'clock on Highway 107 is where the hour hand points to 1258. The first three entries in the Thursday column, in other words, all things can be related to what is known about Joan Webster's disappearance. And I know that there's some info that may be left out, a little bit of context, but I think you can get the idea that he's saying that there are some mathematical signatures that have been placed in, and that it's not an arbitrary setup and arrangement. Now, the suspect that Gareth Penn was trying to look at was none other than Michael Henry O'Hare, who was someone who was a lecturer. I believe his degree is actually in architecture, but he may have 2 PhDs. I'm a little hazy on that one. However, Michael O'Hare was someone who adamantly denied being the Zodiac Killer, as well as being the murderer of Joan Webster. O'Hare was someone who openly wrote a rebuttal of this, and I read it first on ZodiacCiphers.com. However, it is important to note that Joan Webster was a Harvard graduate student studying architecture nonetheless. That's the reason that I brought that up. And I would actually like to go to something that had been provided to me by Eve Carson. I asked her very simply, why is the Zodiac Killer angle wrong? Whether you think it's Michael O'Hare is the Zodiac Killer or Gareth Penn committing the murder of Joan Webster, or a different Zodiac Killer suspect that is going to be involved with the murder. Why is this wrong? And her response is, there are several things that ruled out the Zodiac theories. First, Gareth Penn's manifesto was dismissed by the FBI. They found his conclusions forced and unreliable. There was no real evidence to put Joan Webster's case into the Zodiac's wheelhouse other than Penn's contentions. The most convincing piece of evidence was the eyewitness description from the town taxi cabbie. Joan knew and trusted the man at Logan Airport. She wouldn't have changed cars otherwise, even if it was someone she casually knew or recognized. The man knew where and when Joan would be at Logan. Those plans changed over break. The car was there, ready and waiting. That indicates premeditation, because you know what happened to her when she got into the blue car. She disappeared and was found murdered 8.5 years later. I mean, that's why I said Joan Webster was murdered on or about the 28th of November. It is still completely uncertain how she got from the airport to the dump site, which is an area near Tobacco Road, more or less the northeastern part of the Boston area. Gareth Penn was talking about Revere, Massachusetts. I may have even walked that roundabout area up near the Wonderland metro station, but that is all the northeastern side of the city area. Okay, here are some big differences between the Zodiac Killer and the murder of Joan Webster, and that is that the Zodiac Killer operated by gun and by knife, right? Perhaps maybe there's some unconfirmed crimes that occurred by rope and by fire. The Zodiac did carry rope at Lake Berryessa, though. Although Joan Webster was killed with blunt force trauma. She was buried in the ground. The Zodiac certainly did not do these things. With Lake Herman Road, Blue Rock Springs, Lake Berryessa, and Presidio Heights, all of these crimes are committed and the bodies are left there, and then they're discovered later on by the authorities. That's why they were learned about so quickly, and the Zodiac was able to write messages taking credit for them in the newspapers. With Joan Webster, her body was buried in the ground, which is absolutely different than the Zodiac theory. Now, to go back to something that Gareth Penn has explored in Time 17, this relates to something that I'm very much curious about, and that is the automobile connection. I mean, that's almost something that I think would be very fitting for a novel talking about this type of car door killer that seems to be operating, because one of the few commonalities in the Zodiac world is that they're so occurring so close to these automobiles. And with the Stein shooting, the Zodiac killer is riding in Paul Stein's taxi cab, the final confirmed Zodiac incident on October 11th of 69. And then Gareth Penn would put forward the idea that, all right, he abducted Joan Webster from the taxi line. Now the Zodiac killer is driving the taxi. And it is a theory that, well, I guess it's still even believed by the authorities to this day that that's how and why Joan Webster got into the taxi at Logan Airport. She was offered a ride by an illegal taxi driver, black taxi, gypsy taxi, all of those names might apply, and she got in. Then she decided to continue onward with this person, and that guy drove her to some area, maybe sexually assaulted her, maybe not. We wouldn't know because her remains were discovered 8.5 years later. And then he murdered her with blunt force trauma, striking her in the back of the head. And I have to give credit to Joe from the Zodiac Killer Insight series, who did point out that because of the decomposition in that 8.5-year time frame, other actions that the killer may have done to her would not have been present. Maybe she had been stabbed with a knife and had superficial lacerations, but those were all lost because of the decomposition. So now the Zodiac is driving the taxi. He's taking control of one of the victims, and he has hidden another victim, and her body was buried in the ground, all lining up with a type of mathematical signature to create this criminal masterpiece that is just loaded with signatures. It is important to remember, though, that Joan Webster's death was heavily publicized by the media. The tabloids had a lot of articles on her, the newspapers. It was something widely discussed. And Eve Carson has put forward a theory that she believes the authorities wanted to convict the man Leonard Paradiso for Maria Anuzzi's murder in 1979, so that they could then say that they were attributing Joan Webster's murder to him. They wanted to close a very high-profile case, but it would be almost impossible to convict Leonard Paradiso of Joan Webster's murder, but they could do it with the Anuzzi case, so that's how they went about it. One point where Eve Carson and the authorities are in agreement is the Zodiac killer did not murder Joan Webster. The assistant district attorney, Tim Burke, told me in his own words that to this day he still believes that Joan Webster was murdered by Leonard Paradiso, and that Paradiso had also murdered Maria Anuzzi. I would like to read some things that Gareth Penn has written about Leonard Paradiso. The more I found out about Paradiso, the less sense the story made. According to a jailhouse confession, he had just driven up to the baggage claim area at Eastern Airlines and offered Joan Webster a ride home. She not only accepted the lift home, she agreed to a midnight cruise on his fishing boat, during which he raped her and murdered her by beating her with a whiskey bottle. At least that's what the reported confession says happened. And he's talking about something that was confessed to a jailhouse informant named Robert Bond. And the less sense it makes, well, it's not exactly that she agreed to a midnight cruise. From looking into this in the previous episodes, the theory that they were going with is now known as the boat theory, is that Leonard Paradiso was operating this illegal taxi ride. He sees Joan Webster. He thinks she's in a vulnerable place. He asks her to get into the car. Oh, I'll drive you to your destination for a lower price, the way that any type of black taxi would operate. And then he drove her to the boat, pulled out a handgun, and then said, "Get on the boat." Now, he would have had the handgun, but he didn't use it because Joan Webster wasn't murdered by gunshot, let alone the whiskey bottle angle is something that I discussed with Eve Carson, and I asked her that direct question. Was she actually killed with a whiskey bottle? And Eve's response was no, because a whiskey bottle would not have been strong enough to make the impact into Joan Webster's skull. As we said, she died from blunt force trauma, and Eve Carson said she was most likely struck with either a bat or something with even more density, like a tire iron. But the reason why they said a whiskey bottle was looking at some photo of the boat, this jailhouse informant, that is, was looking at a photo of the boat and saw a glass whiskey bottle on there, and he also had been coached by some of the authorities. And I'll let you guys decide what you think about the truth or not. Okay, so going back to Gareth Penn's narrative here. About a year after I had gotten in contact with the Websters, Terry Webster called me to say that there was another suspect in the murder of her daughter. This person was Leonard Paradiso, and there were a lot of things that made him look likely. Well, I'm not actually sure. I mean, I think it's really quite unlikely that he committed the crime. Terry Webster is Joan Webster's mother, by the way. She told me that the strongest evidence was a jailhouse confession that Paradiso had made, in which he admitted to two fellow prisoners that he had murdered Joan Webster and somebody named Maria Anuzzi. I didn't get a lot of detail, and since I didn't know at the time what to make of it, I was inclined to believe that she knew what she was talking about. The events of February 1984 completely changed my mind, however, and subsequently I found out a lot more about Paradiso. In July of 1984, about the time that Alden was having the $400 hold dug at Goose Pond, Paradiso was convicted of the murder of Maria Anuzzi. Terry Webster, who was close to the prosecution, told me that the prosecution strategy was to get Paradiso convicted of as much as they could and pin him on, jail him, and then throw away the key. When it was clear to him that he would never get out of prison anyway, they would offer him a deal. He could get any prison he wanted, choose his own prison and work assignments, enjoy a private cell if he wanted one, as long as he confessed to the murder of Joan Webster. In that sense, at least, Maria Anuzzi's murder trial was not about the murder of Maria Anuzzi, but about the murder of Joan Webster. It certainly didn't bear much resemblance to justice. Maria Anuzzi had been a voluptuously built young woman in her early 20s. I believe she was actually 22 at the time she was murdered. She lived with her boyfriend, David Doyle, but she was often unfaithful to him. I think that's actually true. They fought constantly about her infidelity. I think they fought about everything, to be honest. Both of them seemed like they were somewhat hot-tempered. On at least one occasion, Doyle had attacked her, putting his hands around her throat as to strangle her. When they fought, she often scratched his face. The neighbors were familiar with their battles. Now, I'm not exactly sure how often her scratching his face was, but it appears that definitely happened at least once. And also, previously, Doyle had strangled her with his hands, and there was an account of Maria Anuzzi being strangled by her boyfriend, and red marks were left on her neck in the months prior to her murder. On the evening of her death, Marie and David had been at a wedding reception together with Leonard Paradiso and his girlfriend. Marie was very drunk and made passes at all the men. David flew into a rage. They fought and made quite a scene. He stormed out of the party by himself. The host asked Paradiso and his girlfriend to take Marie home. She was too inebriated to make it herself. She was wearing a black leotard, black tights, and a wraparound skirt with a scarf. It actually says a red wraparound skirt, but I don't think that's too important. I would only challenge one thing here from the previous episodes. I think David Doyle actually went home not because of what was happening here, although these events may have taken place. I really think it was because David Doyle had ripped his pants at the wedding, and he did get into an argument with Marie there, but that was just the real reason that he stormed out of the party, was because he had ripped his pants. Paradiso dropped her off at a bar near the apartment which she shared with David Doyle. She said he recalled... Yeah, it says that. She said he recalled that she was afraid to go home and confront Doyle. Sometime later, Paradiso came back to the bar with Marie, or perhaps it was Paradiso's girlfriend, or Paradiso and his girlfriend. The testimony of the people was mixed up. It is horribly confusing, but yes, this is very important. When I did the most recent episode on the murder of Maria Anuzzi, it doesn't appear that Paradiso dropped Marie off at the bar. There's this place called the Cardinale's Nest Bar, which is 2 blocks from Maria Anuzzi's home, the apartment that she shared with David Doyle. It's actually the girlfriend of Leonard Paradiso, whose name is Candy Wyatt, and she has driven Maria Anuzzi to the bar. Then she goes back to the this post-wedding party that's going on to get Leonard Paradiso. But then they realize that some of Marie's items are in Candy's car. So then they decide, okay, we're going to go back to the bar and give these items to Maria Anuzzi. And then Leonard Paradiso is actually seen by witnesses holding the door open for Maria Anuzzi so she can walk out to the car and collect her items. But that's where the prosecution cut it off. And they're like, see, look, Leonard Paradiso was the last person to see her alive. And then she actually entered the bar again, was seen by 4 other eyewitnesses. But I would like to get back to Gareth Penn's book here. Now, let's see, where was I? In any case, her body was found later on in a marshy area near Lynn, Massachusetts. It was found the next day out in the marsh near the clam digger's shop where Paradiso peddled bait. Near the clam digger's shop, that's the first time I've ever heard that one since I've reread this stuff. She had been strangled with her own scarf, and her shoes and tights were missing. The medical examiner found semen in her vagina. Ordinarily, if there had been any reason to suspect rape, the semen would have been examined to determine the donor's blood type, but in this case there were none of the scratches, cuts, or bruises that would usually suggest that a rape had taken place. Rape was the furthest thing from the medical examiner's mind when he examined her body, and no semen test was made. Yeah, very simply, they didn't perform any type of rape kit, but it was determined that Marie most likely had consensual sex at some time in the day prior to her murder, but I don't think there's anything to think about there. Here's what the state said they had against Paradiso. He had been seen leaving the bar with the victim. Her body had been found near his place of employment, and the 2 convicts had said that he had admitted to killing Maria Anuzzi to them. Of course, they had also said that he had admitted to killing Joan Webster, but the judge instructed the jury not to consider that they had heard anything about Joan Webster in considering the matter of Maria Anuzzi. Paradiso had already been convicted of the Webster murder in the pages of the Globe and the Herald. That means just in like the court of public opinion. He was never convicted of it in real life, which had acted as mouthpieces for the prosecutor Timothy Burke. Burke had revealed every bit of evidence that he had thought Paradiso would have to the newspapers even before there was an indictment, which is not to say that there ever was an indictment, because to this date no jury has found Burke's evidence to be persuasive enough to warrant binding Paradiso over the murder of Joan Webster. And that's what Eve Garson has really tried to share, that I think she's actually in agreement with Gareth Penn about that. You can see that these people all have some similarities, but the thing that they would be in agreement with is that Gareth Penn and Eve Garson can say, Leonard Paradiso did not murder Joan Webster, also that the evidence is insufficient, and they try to get Paradiso convicted for the Anuzzi murder, and then just attribute the crime to Paradiso so that they can make a storm in the media. They can act like something has been solved. But to this day, I do believe that Joan Webster's murder was not, it hasn't been solved. I don't believe they got the right guy. And I also do not believe that it was the Zodiac killer. To talk about that for a little bit, it's not only the differences in the crimes, like the MO or the type of methodology that's gone about, or operating an illegal taxi. There is the Kathleen Johns incident that occurred on March 22nd of 1970, which was an attempted abduction. somewhat of a successful abduction for a little while, but that turned out to be an incident where Kathleen Johns would have escaped. Some people think that was the Zodiac Killer. I also do not believe it was the Zodiac Killer, because in the canonical crimes, the Zodiac Killer didn't abduct the victims. And it's also important to note that the Zodiac didn't bury the bodies of the victims. He didn't move the bodies of the victims. The Zodiac is all about committing the crime, leaving, and then bragging about it in letters or composing the ciphers. Richard Grinnell of ZodiacCiphers.com brought up a very good point about the Zodiac's operations. With the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the murder of Paul Stein, the Zodiac is begging people to think that he did it. With any other Zodiac crime, or like the unconfirmed crimes that have been allegedly attributed to the Zodiac Killer, there's just some very, very faint and very, very loose allusion to it. For example, after the Blue Rock Springs shooting, a letter is mailed in that says, "I will state some facts that only I and the police know." Where is that after the murder of Joan Webster? If the Zodiac Killer had actually committed that crime, how difficult would it have been to say, "Oh, by the way, I'm in Massachusetts, and this is what I did to that girl leaving the airport," and just give some type of info that would have actually connected him to that crime. I mean, that just simply is not present. But it is fair to point out that the Zodiac Killer did say after the Stein murder that he would not announce his crimes the same way. With the murder of Paul Stein, though, a piece of his shirt was cut and then mailed in with multiple Zodiac Killer letters to confirm that he did it. And that's also begging people to see, hey, look, I committed this crime. Many people point to the Lake Berryessa stabbing on September 27th of 1969, and they say, the Zodiac Killer put on a costume wearing the Zodiac symbol, but he stabbed the victims expecting that both of them would die, and then he walked back to their car and wrote a message. While the Zodiac Killer did not write an enormous amount in the letters about the Lake Berryessa stabbing, he did make a phone call after it, and he wrote the message on the car door, which I think is a substitute for a letter. So you have someone who's really trying to show the world, I committed these crimes. And with the murder of Joan Webster, all you really have is the Santa Claus card. So it appears that the Zodiac Killer has no real precise information about the murder of Joan Webster, and as far as Eve Carson's statement about how Gareth Penn's manifesto is forced, I guess I was on board with that, but I use some different phrasing. I have multiple book discussions here on this channel talking about Zodiac Unmasked, or The Great Zodiac Killer Hoax, or The Most Dangerous Animal of All by Gary Stewart, but they are much longer than my book discussion on Gareth Penn's Times 17. I only did 6 episodes in that because my response was simple. To continue the book discussion, you would first have to accept that everything in the Zodiac Killer mystery is a mathematical signature, and I didn't accept that premise. I'm like, well, I guess I can't really continue. And all of this stuff about how if you go to the traffic circle in Revere, Massachusetts, and you put 12:58 on the clock or whatever time it was, then that's going to match up to where Joan Webster's body was found, or just matching up to anything involving the Webster crime scene. I think that type of thinking is very much impractical, and I can accept Gareth Penn's statement that the Zodiac Killer would have had a very high understanding of mathematics. I can accept Gareth Penn's statement that we should be looking for someone who has graduate-level education, or maybe even perhaps very intense military education. Someone who has really learned a lot about math and science, or very specifically chemistry, and not only mathematics, but also other things like architecture as well, that would allow them to understand angles and let alone the radians So I think those things are very important. And somebody once told me, I've said it once and I'll say it again, they said, "You're taking Gareth Penn too literally if you think that everything is a mathematical signature." He was really just trying to highlight that the mathematical clues are something from the Zodiac killer mystery that have gone underreported, and they were underreported till Gareth Penn started pointing them out. So I do not believe that Michael O'Hare was the Zodiac killer. I do not believe that Gareth Penn was the Zodiac, and I also do not believe that the Zodiac killer has any connection to the Webster murder. If anything, the Zodiac may have just learned about Joan Webster from the tabloids. As far as Leonard Paradiso committing either the Webster murder or the Anuzzi murder, I'm also forced to say that I don't think that he did that. David Doyle, the angry boyfriend, is such a better suspect in the murder of Maria Anuzzi. As for the murder of Joan Webster, who actually committed that crime, I have no idea.
This has been a production of Black Box Online Radio, hosted by Ned. Thanks for tuning in. Black Box Online Radio comes to you 3 times a week, covering serial killers and true crime, but any subject is fair game.
So see you on Instagram for the bonus podcast. Until next time.